Richard Greene, I became the chair in late 81 and served during the year 1982. Well, during the decade of the 70s, the city almost doubled in size. And so as we moved into the 80s, that growth continued. And so the pressure was on the city to manage that growth, to keep up with the demands that came with new residents and new businesses. And the chamber's role in all that was to provide services to the business community and celebrate the fact that membership was growing and the future looked very promising as far as businesses being essential to the health and well-being and economic opportunities of our city, job creation and all the rest that goes with that. So all of that was ramping up to become what it eventually did that led to today. The chamber outreach at the time to existing as well as the new businesses was to come to us. We've got resources that will help you connect in ways that are important to your mission and objectives in your field, whatever it may be. And so the chamber was kind of a convener of information distribution and support. Now, there wasn't any kind of funding to provide financial support for businesses, but there was a willingness and an eagerness to help in the ways that we could by sharing information. The city suddenly was a major league city. At the time, I think there were 28 teams, and so there was only that many cities. In fact, many of the cities in the east and out on the west coast had two teams, and so there really wasn't that many cities in the country that could claim they were a major league city, but we could, and starting in 1972. And sort of that intangible identity was part of what we promoted throughout the campaigns to build the entertainment district that started with the development of the ballpark in Arlington that opened in 1994. But maintaining our status as a major league city was really critically important in my mind to Arlington's identity and to its position nationally among the other great cities that got to do that. Well, the sense of identity with the business community being important to the broader community as a whole. I mean, job creation, economic opportunity, the revenue that the business community provided for the city, whether it would be property tax, sales tax revenue, and that was always growing. That kept property taxes low. And so absolutely, we were beginning to realize the value of business development, economic growth in the city. And we did that aggressively as both the chamber and the city, working together without any kind of formal connection until later. But in those early going years, we were working side by side. In fact, my business office was a block away from the chamber's office. The awareness that I developed as a board member and then as chair of the chamber, I came to a realization that the life of the community as a whole depended on the success of our local economy. And yet there wasn't any kind of specific initiative to develop that opportunity further than it just was happening on its own. And so we began to talk about economic development initiatives, and that conversation went on for 3 or 4 years before we actually began to decide, let's take some steps and make that happen. By that time, I had been elected to the city council and then as mayor. And as that conversation continued to develop over those years, we wound up talking to the then CEO of the chamber about their interest in taking a role formally developed by the city, help and partially funded by the city, to become more aggressive in pursuing corporate America for our town and for the people of our community. So we entered into an actual contract where the city was funding the work of the chamber's arm for economic development. A new senior staff member was brought in by the chamber, and it was his assignment to initiate that effort and to develop the requirements in the contract that the city had put before the chamber, who had agreed to take on this role. And so that was when we formalized an economic development program. And if you look at where we are today, with the Arlington Economic Development Foundation, funded and supported and approved by the taxpayers and voters of the city. It all began during that period in the 80s where that first step to move in that direction was taken. Well, I think, it's just Arlington's story is almost always connected to the idea that one success builds on top of another. Arlington doesn't have a sense of being satisfied with where we are. We always are pursuing opportunities that will take us further down the road of success. And so when the Rangers realized that they were going to have a new facility because the one that they were playing in was inadequate. It was a retooled minor league field, and they needed something more. And so we began to put together a deal with the team owners and put that plan before the voters, and they showed up in record numbers and overwhelmingly approved the idea to build the ballpark in Arlington. And that decision became the first step in developing the entertainment district that we see today, a $5 billion mammoth development, the biggest sports and entertainment venue between the East and the West Coast. And by the way, it's not done. I mean, the developers out there and the city in partnership with some of them have plans for the future that are going to carry this on. Well, so much of what you just described was certainly unimaginable back when. Now it's no longer unimaginable. I mean, anything is possible in the world of entertainment and sports, and it can take place right here in Arlington because of the infrastructure that has been developed for that very outcome. And so to say that we're surprised is probably not correct. To say that we are pleased because it is happening the way we hoped for is correct. Well, I think that the sense of what Arlington was doing and what it was becoming was always part of what I identified as happening now and for the future. And that quote that you mentioned was accidentally uttered to a newspaper reporter one Saturday morning. I was on the way to 7-Eleven to get my Saturday morning coffee, and she called on my cell phone, which was a big brick, and said that the paper had just gotten a newspaper article. It was a magazine article that had evaluated suburbs around the country, and she says, Mayor, Arlington didn't fare very well, so I'd like to get your response to that. And without thinking, and by now, this was in like my last year in office, and by now I fancied myself as somebody that was capable of dealing with the media in a way that was going to work out okay. Well, I lost all of that experience all of a sudden, and I just blurted out to her on the phone. I says, well, first of all, Arlington is nobody's damn suburb, and so that whole article is ridiculous. And so we went on and talked about what was found in the article, and her asking me questions about it and me answering them. And I thought that's what the story would be about. Sunday morning, I pick up the paper off my front porch on my way to teach a Sunday school class, and there it is on page 1, Arlington is nobody's damn suburb, Mayor Greene. And at first I was terribly embarrassed, and I thought that I would be haunted by that. But as time went on, it became clear to me that people identified with that in a very personal way. And their civic pride was activated, and they were pleased that we were able to be a major city and not just some suburb off in the side someplace doing a few things when we were doing great things. It's stronger than it's ever been. In fact, I think our current CEO says not only are we a can-do city, we are a will-do city, and that's right. The momentum, it kind of carries the moment, if that's something that fits. And the reality is that all our leaders need to do is just keep it going, because there's so much energy behind what has taken place and the reputation that the city has of not missing any opportunity and seizing the moment and moving forward. And so I think that all of that is really unique. I'm not sure how many other cities have the kind of experience over the past 50 years that we have had. And so, and like I mentioned earlier, it's ongoing, and there's more to come. You know, we've talked about the big stuff. Let me describe to you an experience that I had in my first month or two in the mayor's office. And I'm thinking about all these big things that we have coming. And in fact, I campaigned on a list of stuff that I thought was going to move the city forward. And there were big ideas. I got a phone call from a lady. And in fact, she apologizes for bothering me. She knows that I'm busy, but that she just wanted to ask if I could help with something. And I said, of course, what can I do for you? And she says, well, my husband and I moved here from Long Island just a little more than a year ago, and he recently died. And I like to drive out to the edge of Lake Arlington and look out across the lake. And it reminds me of the time that my husband and I spent on Long Island, and we enjoyed that. And so it is an opportunity for me to remember him and to remember us in that way. However, the police officer that patrols the lake doesn't want me to park there. He wants me to park in the parking lot. Well, I can't see the lake as well from the parking lot. And so I was just wondering, could you make it possible for me to spend maybe 10 minutes, 15 at the most, in my car at the edge of the lake? And I said, my goodness, Lake Arlington is your substitute for the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not sure that there's any answer I can give you other than yes, we'll figure out how to let you do that. So I called the city manager. I told her, I said, we'll call you back. Called the city manager. I told him of the effort, and so he immediately said, we'll handle that, Mayor. We can take care of that. And so I was able to call her back and say, not only are you going to be able to do that, but in fact, the lake officer who has been telling you couldn't is now going to be sure you're safe. Well, what that did for me was suddenly remind me that out of a big list of big stuff that I was going to lead the city into achieving, that there were 300,000 individuals in the community that all had their own sense of identity with the community and what was going on. And so maybe she would not have any worries about the street conditions or about economic development or about a continued role as a major league city and a ballpark and a General Motors plant. I mean, none of those things were of much interest to her. What was her ability to drive up to the edge of the lake and have memories of her and her husband's life together. So it was, I always thought that was providential, that I was reminded that there are individuals who have a whole lot of different interests and concerns about their life in the city, and the rest of it is ongoing, but one at a time. People have their own concerns and needs, and so the mayor needs to be prepared to respond to those too. It's always been interesting and quite pleasurable in many ways when we're discovered by places around the country that had not been aware of us. There was never a time when that was more possible and happened more directly than it did during the time when it looked like we were going to lose our General Motors plant. The national economy was bad, and so the news media from around the country was using Arlington's loss of the General Motors plant as an example of the impact on people of the economic downturn that was occurring. It was a big recession. And so it was always interesting, and it kind of became predictable when we had the national news media here in Arlington who discovered us, and they were watching what we were doing. And then when we succeeded with what they felt like was not possible to achieve, then they suddenly realized that some of the things that were being said about the can-do spirit of this city were actually not just a slogan, but it was a true definition of who we are. Because the role that the city was playing in saving the General Motors plant was something that they had not seen anywhere else. I mean, we didn't have any ability to accomplish that outcome other than to promise General Motors that this plant would be worth saving because of the commitment of its workforce and the community working together to achieve the outcomes that the company was looking for. And so, like I say, Ted Koppel did 2 Nightline programs from here, and the New York Times did a 2-page spread in their business section of what we were doing, and so we got discovered by some of that national media who had not known we were here. When you talk to Jeff Williams and he talks to you about the National Medal of Honor Museum, and the essential element of their decision was that they liked the spirit of this community and the commitment of its people to achieve things. Well, that's the same kind of response that we get on these other things that we've talked about here today, and it is alive and well. And then, like I say, the most current example is the National Medal of Honor Museum. They discovered Arlington and they liked it better than they did anywhere else. It's been a journey that my wife and I have shared since we arrived here in 1967. And we discovered Arlington because we had chosen Six Flags as the destination of our wedding trip when we got married in 1964. And we arrived here in the 3rd year of the operation of Six Flags. We did all of the kinds of things that Six Flags had to offer back then. And I think we did it for $2.95 entry fee each. And so a couple of years later, the mortgage company that I was working for decided they wanted to open a Texas office, and they were thinking about Houston, and wanted to know if I would be interested in moving to Texas and opening the branch office that they wanted to put in this state. And I held up my hand and I said, well, I don't know anything about Texas, but I know a really great location where we could get in the middle of the Dallas-Fort Worth area that is growing like crazy, and we can really succeed in the mortgage business. And so they said, well, let's take a look at that. And I said, by the way, what is the name of that place? And I said, the name of it is Arlington. And my wife and I have been there once, but I'm telling you, we'd love to go back. Like so many people back in 1964, that many years ago, when we arrived here, I imagine together with most of the admissions to the Six Flags Park, people thought they were still in Dallas. You know, it was hard to make the connection that you had left Dallas, that you were in another place, and it turns out that the other place is really quite special. Angus Wynn's son told me that his father was standing on the doorstep of the Arlington Downs groundskeeper. And it was right on the knoll where the current location of Globe Life Field is. That was where the groundskeeper's home was. And Angus was standing on his front porch in 1957, pointing to the turnpike that was just opening. And he said to him, Arlington is the location where we all need to be paying attention to. Dallas and Fort Worth are going to grow together, and they're going to meet right here. And I'm going to get myself in the path of that development, and I'm going to create a huge industrial complex here, industrial park. And like a lot of visionaries, he was a little ahead of his time, so he needed to figure out a way to get from where he was to where he wanted to be. And he had spent some time with Walt Disney out in California, and he told his partners, we can't do what Walt has done, but we can do something kind of like that and create some immediate revenue that will support our further development of this industrial park. And so you take an account of those moments in history when decisions were made that set into motion things that are going on today. And so the coming of Six Flags was a step in the direction. Tom Vandegrift used attendance at the Six Flags Park as a way to convince Major League Baseball that folks would come to Arlington for ball games if they would just put a team here. And after 10 years of pursuing that idea, he succeeded. If you took an aerial view of the ribbon cutting of the Turnpike in 1957, what you would see at the 360 intersection is a road that if you went to the north, you would pass by a cemetery. And if you went to the south, you could get down to the new General Motors plant that had only been open a short period of time. But that was all there was at that intersection. With those was a cemetery and a car plant. And so today it's a lot more than that. The other significant achievement in my service as mayor, with my wife as my partner in all of that, was her vision for the development of River Legacy Park. The city has today the ability to point out the 1,400 acres of River Legacy Park at a trail along the Trinity River that you can go pursue a trip through and be still for a minute and listen to the river coming by, and maybe the rustling of breeze of the trees and critters scampering across the ground, and forget that you're surrounded by 8 million people. So that's an environmental wonderland. And my wife and the parks director at the time came up with the idea that we need to put a nature center out here. And so that began a conversation that resulted in her and her team coming before the city council when I was mayor and showing us plans for what is now the Living Science Center, the nature center that's out there. And the reaction from the members of the city council from that presentation that day was overwhelmingly positive. They said, oh, this is just beautiful. This is great. They also showed pictures of what it might look like. The only problem was it was going to cost $5 million, and the city only had $500,000 in the bond monies to put that together. And so it looks like that we're not going to be able to do that. And thank you for your presentation. Well, I got home that night and my wife said something along the lines of, you just hide and watch. Ye of little faith, we're going to build that nature center, and we already have plans to get the money that we need privately. And so they raised $4.5 million, built the nature center, and a lot of people identify my service as mayor as that being one of the achievements that we did that time, but all of that belongs to her and her team, because they're the ones that had the belief. We were excited to see the idea, but we didn't know how we were going to fund it because we didn't have the funds. But she had an idea about how to raise the money privately and did it. And now, it's 27 years old and it's quite an achievement. So that's another one of those things that happens when you believe that you can, instead of deciding that for whatever reason it's not going to be possible. And in fact, it could be, and it was. Well, I guess that there's so much of Arlington's story that will be left untold because we don't have the time, or there's not really the opportunity. And so it's all out there. People can discover it in many different ways. And so it is hopefully something that people are interested in learning about and knowing about, and say, well, Arlington, how did this happen? And the answer to that question is readily available, and it's in this day of technology and the internet and all the rest, it's discoverable just asking Google the question and you'll get the answer, and it probably is going to be pretty accurate. The partnership between the city and the chamber representing the business community, it means that we have all bases covered. The city's responsible for the lives, supporting the lives of the 400,000 people who live here, and the business community is connected to the chamber in ways that provide them the opportunities that are available only here. And when the two entities come together, it's a good-looking picture. It's a compelling picture of what can be achieved in this city between the local government and the business community. The sky's the limit, and we hope that ordinary citizens are aware of that in a way that they perhaps would appreciate it as they understand more about it, because I think sometimes there is sort of a disconnect that thinking that the business community is serving the businesses and the city is serving the interest of the political leaders, when actually both the chamber and the political leaders' mission in life is to serve the interest of the people. And that's a commitment that has served us well and will continue into the future. And it's probably the hallmark of our success. I think it's a few words that describe Arlington's success story. In 1950, when kind of the modern era began, Arlington was a town of less than 8,000 people. And they were doing pretty good because they were happy about their small town and what was going on here. But there was more to come. And actually, even the early initiatives to move from the water stop that we were known as at the time to where we are today is all about working together to succeed in ways that we perhaps at some time could only imagine, but for us became a reality.